Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's live call with Congressman Adam Smith. During this event, we'll be taking questions from constituents like you. To ask a question, press star 3 on your telephone keypad to enter the question queue. During this call, you can also get signed up to receive Representative Smith's e-newsletter by pressing star 6. So to repeat, press star 3 to ask a question and star 6 to subscribe to our newsletter. With that, I'll turn it over to Congressman Smith. Congressman, the floor is yours, sir.
Right, thank you very much, and thanks to all of you for joining. I know it is a holiday weekend, but I'm trying to do these telephone town halls every 2 weeks or so just to keep in touch, even during a holiday weekend, because there is a lot going on. I want to walk through sort of 3 basic areas of concern, let you know some of the issues we're working on. Congress is coming back into session on Tuesday. The fiscal year ends at the end of the month of September, so we'll have to deal with the budget challenges, but there's a whole host of other issues going on. And one of my biggest concerns is that the Trump administration continues to consolidate power, which I believe is outside the bounds of the law and the Constitution, and certainly that's impacting the basic freedoms of our country, but also policy in a number of different areas. One of the biggest challenges we have right now is on the federal budget. As I mentioned, we head up at the end of the fiscal year on October 1st. The Trump administration has continually refused to spend money the way the law has told them to spend money. They have blocked funds going out on a variety of different issues. Most recently, they did a rescission or a freezing of funds to the tune of about $4.9 billion for foreign aid that was approved. All of this is outside of the law. And certainly it has an impact from a policy perspective, because you have grants, programs that were supposed to be funded across the country that are suddenly cut off. I've been home for the last 6 weeks, running around the district, meeting with different groups. Number of different agencies have been impacted by this. Child care agency providing housing, education, healthcare, a whole bunch of different things that have blocked funding that should have been there. So it's bad in terms of the impact on policy. It's also bad because the president's not supposed to have that power. And lastly, it's bad because as we negotiate how to fund the government for fiscal year 26, Congress can't really trust the president. We go in, we get an agreement between the House, the Senate, and the president typically, and then we fund the government. But the president has made it clear that he doesn't think he has to honor that agreement, and will make cuts accordingly. So that is, having a huge impact on our ability to function as a government. I'm also concerned about the increasing use of the U.S. military and aggressive police tactics by ICE and others directed by the president across the country. We have seen this in Los Angeles and Washington, D.C. Apparently, it's coming to Chicago soon. I do agree that crime is a problem that needs to be better addressed. I believe we need to hire more police in a number of areas, better enforce the law, but also we need to build stronger communities so those communities have the support necessary. All that needs to happen, but involving the United States military and domestic law enforcement is again something that has been against the Constitution and the law of the U.S., and for a reason. I'm the ranking member on the House Armed Services Committee. I know the U.S. military is not trained for domestic law enforcement. It is a misuse of them and also dangerous because of that lack of training. It also is a fundamental violation of people's rights. We have people being picked up, locked up without due process. We've seen this over and over again. And it's not just ICE. It's not just the immigration enforcement agencies. The president is using the DEA, the ATF. He's even using the postal security forces, amongst others, to pick people up off the streets without due process. I think that is a threat to the basic freedoms that we all face. And again, an abuse of power in the presidency. The tariff policies that we've seen. An appellate court just ruled that the president does not have the power to put in place the tariffs that he has put in place. Now, they didn't reverse them pending appeal to the Supreme Court, but it's pretty cut and dried that the Congress has the power to levy tariffs. However you feel about the policy, and I'll get to that in a minute, having a president who doesn't think that the law applies to him is dangerous on a whole series of levels. We've seen this at the Justice Department as well, whereby you have, the people who worked on prosecuting the folks who led the insurrection at the U.S. Capitol on January 6th. Not only has he pardoned all of the people who assaulted the police officers and assaulted the United States Capitol that day, they're now firing the attorneys at the Justice Department who prosecuted those cases. He is politicizing the Justice Department and therefore making it far less likely that we're going to have an unbiased Justice Department. Meanwhile, he's also prosecuting his enemies and pardoning his friends. While there's also been a number of firings, the firing of the Fed Reserve Board member, which is, again, against law. The president does not have the power to fire a Fed board chair. So all of that is deeply concerning to me. We should be a nation of laws, not a nation of individuals. It's the only way we can keep civil society moving forward, and that's under threat. Second, this has had an impact on policy. The autocratic approach and also the way the president has governed. We've seen this most recently with what's happening at the Center for Disease Control, the CDC, which has done a relatively good job of, vaccinating, keep identifying disease, keeping us safe, and really improving the health of the American people over the course of decades. It has been devastated now by Secretary Robert Kennedy Jr. A number of CDC people have quit in protest to his decision to try and block access to critical vaccines. You've also seen a dramatic reduction in the investment in basic scientific research that has been so instrumental in keeping the U.S. not just healthy, but a leader economically and in technology. So those policies are problematic. The tariffs are having an impact on the cost of everyday items for people. The president, I think, rightly said that inflation was one of the biggest issues in the last campaign. And yet, since being elected, he hasn't done anything about it except raise tariffs and have a negative impact. The immigration policies also have that impact as they've been rounding up people. And we have a number of companies now that don't have the workers that they need. So all of that is what we're walking back into in 2 days in Washington, D.C. An autocratic president who I think is pursuing policies that are harmful. And that's not even mentioning the cuts that were in the budget reconciliation bill, cuts to food programs and healthcare programs. I met with a number of healthcare providers, community healthcare clinics, as well as hospitals. We are going to see a lot of closures of providers now that we have a massive increase in the uninsured population. And just to give you some very specific numbers on that, since the passage of the Affordable Care Act in 2010, the number of uninsured in Washington state has gone from 12% down to 4%. As these cuts to the Affordable Care Act and to Medicaid get put into place, you will see that number go back up. That means you will have a lot of people getting uncompensated care, and that will drive up the costs for everybody. We need to get everybody covered, not to be knocking more people off of healthcare insurance. You've also, I'm sure, seen there is now going to be a pilot project on Medicare that requires pre-approval from the agency that manages Medicare before you can get certain basic healthcare services. We've seen this used in Medicare Advantage plans and elsewhere. And what it leads to is the denial of care that people need and qualify for. So all of this, I think, is having a negative impact on where we're going as a country. And we got to fight those battles when we get back to Washington, D.C., to try to better protect those programs, reverse the tariff policies, and get a more sensible immigration policy. And on that last point, I want to be clear, we need a secure border and we need to enforce immigration laws. But that's not what Donald Trump is doing right now. He is using ICE and these other domestic law enforcement agencies as sort of his own personal police force, again, to pick people up without due process. Locally, I do want to highlight an issue and a challenge, something I've been working on for a while. There was an audit that came out last week about how King County spends a lot of our tax dollars. It was embarrassing. There is a total lack of accountability on billions of dollars in grant programs that are going out to agencies without transparency, without oversight, and in many instances going to nonprofits that clearly don't know what they're doing. The one stat that stood out for me was over 50% of the grants that went out went to agencies or nonprofits that were considered high risk. And what high risk meant is they did not have competent management style that could give any degree of confidence that they knew what they were doing or how to spend the money. Why are our tax dollars going to high risk nonprofits who don't know what they're doing? We just need to govern better on this. Another disturbing statistic that came from that, I find both of these things disturbing. Actually, one was the policy of King County is that they should try and do site visits for a third of the nonprofits that they give these grants to. Why a third? Why not 100%? I don't know. But the audit showed that only about 2% were actually visited. Now, as I said, I've been here for the last 6 weeks. I'm very interested in the various nonprofits that are getting county money. I think I've personally visited a heck of a lot more of those agencies receiving King County money than the people who are supposed to be exercising oversight over it. You know, this isn't really a political point, it's a policy point. I'm very concerned about Donald Trump. But if we're going to stop the direction that he's taking us in terms of policy, we're going to have to show that we can govern better. We're going to have to present a reasonable alternative. And if we're passing out billions of dollars in grant money without any accountability or any results, then we're not doing that. There's also a story this morning about how there's some 3,000 units of affordable housing that are empty because the rents are too high. We have a major housing crisis. We spent billions of dollars building these units, and they're sitting empty because of how expensive it was to build those units because of all the rules and regulations around building affordable housing. Now, the other question that I want to ask is, why don't they lower the rents? I mean, yes, I know because of how expensive it was, they would like to be able to charge the higher amount in order to get their money back. But something is better than nothing. And why, at a time when we still have a major homeless problem, do we have so many affordable housing units sitting empty? So I'm very focused on good governance as well, getting after those issues. So there is a lot on. One final thing I should talk about, international issues. The war in Ukraine is still going, despite Donald Trump's promise to it ended on day one. Russia is attacking in an ever more aggressive manner. And just to be clear, I want to get to peace. I want to get to an end of that war. But the only way to do it is support Ukraine so that Putin realizes that he can't take over the country. So I support continuing to help Ukraine. The war in Gaza, another war that Trump wanted a Nobel Peace Prize for bringing peace to the Middle East. There is not peace in the Middle East. The war in Gaza is as intense as it has been, and it needs to stop. I do support Israel. I am adamantly opposed to Hamas, but I can tell you again, as the ranking member of the House Armed Services Committee, military leaders have told me there is simply nothing more militarily to be accomplished against Hamas. In order to stop Hamas, you got to build an alternative. You have to work with the Palestinian people who oppose to Hamas, give them some kind of future, and increase humanitarian assistance. So we need an immediate ceasefire and the rushing of aid into Gaza. There are too many wars that are continuing to go forward. So a lot of challenges in the world, a lot going on. I want to get to your questions, comments, and ideas. So I will turn it back over to the moderator, and I'll take your questions.
Thank you very much, sir. And for everybody that's listening in, if you've got a question for your congressman, please press *3 on your telephone keypad to get into the question queue. Again, if you've got a question on your mind, please press *3 to get involved in today's conversation. Now, I'd like to start, Congressman, with an online question. This one was submitted by Colin, who's wondering, what can be done to fix the widening income gap? Both Democratic and Republican administrations for the past 50 years have allowed the very wealthy to pay less tax, and the average worker has been getting less and working more. Do you support a wealth tax?
Yes. And I think you have correctly identified the single biggest issue that we face. Income inequality has grown over the course of the last 50 years. We've generated a lot of wealth in this country, but it's gone into the hands of too few people, whereas the working class has not gotten enough increase in their wages, while housing, education, healthcare, so many things have gone up in cost. the basic middle class ideal that I grew up with, which was, work a blue collar job, you can afford a house, you can afford to get an education if you work at it. The notion, work hard, play by the rules, get ahead. Too many people in this country are working hard, playing by the rules, and not getting ahead. Now, there are a lot of reasons for why this happened. One, I completely agree with you, is the tax code. I have voted against every federal tax cut since I came into office because those tax cuts continually advantage the folks at the high end of the income scale. They're the ones making money. So yes, absolutely. Restructuring our tax code so that the people who benefit the most from our economic growth pay is an important part of it. But that's not enough. The other problem is that corporations have come to simply reward shareholders and executives and investors and not workers. I think we need to change corporate law. Corporations only exist in the United States of America because federal law says they can exist. And I've heard many corporations say, well, our obligation is to our shareholders. We have to drive up the share price at the expense of everything else. We should change that. There should be a balance. Yes, you need to have an adequate investor return, but it also matters whether or not your workers are getting paid a decent enough wage. It matters whether or not you're contributing to the broader community. Those things should be balanced. There's actually a very good book called The Jack Welch Effect. Jack Welch was the CEO of GE back in the 80s and 90s, I think, who pushed the idea that the job of the corporation should be to maximize, short-term profits to get shareholder return. It didn't work out too well for GE as a company over the long term. So we've incentivized the money going there. I also think that basically we need to do a lot more to help workers. I'm a very strong supporter of unions for that reason. Unions give bargaining power, but we've seen the percentage of the workforce that is unionized shrink over that 50-year period. It's not a coincidence that while that is shrinking, the income gap is growing. And then I do think it makes sense to make investments like was envisioned in the Build Back Better plan. I didn't love everything about the Build Back Better plan, but the basic idea that there would be increases on taxes on the wealthy and also reductions in the cost of healthcare by helping Medicare negotiate drug prices. And then you would take that money to help people be able to afford healthcare, education, childcare, basic middle class expenses to make that shift. I think if you do all of those things, that can help reverse this trend line that you just outlined, which again, number one biggest problem we face. I think it's the number one biggest reason that people are frustrated, angry, that they're turning to politicians. And my personal opinion, Donald Trump is a demagogue. They turn to that because he comes along and promises to fix it. And they're frustrated, they're angry, and rightfully so. Now, of course, the policies that President Trump has put in place have done nothing to fix this problem, but he speaks to that anger. We need to speak to that anger with substantive policies that will change the economic reality for that roughly 60 to 70% of the American population that's struggling every week to pay the bills.
If you've got a question you'd like to ask during this live call, please press *3 on your telephone keypad. And let's go to the phone. We've got Mike in Bellevue joining us. Mike, you're live with Congressman Smith. Go ahead with your question, please.
Hi, Congressman Smith. Thanks for doing these conference calls. I try to get on everyone that you do. Don't make them all, but I make a lot, and I appreciate your efforts in making it happen. And then second, can and should Washington State follow California's lead in redistricting to try to offset what Texas and other red states are trying to do in creating more Republican seats in Congress?
Yeah, I mean, I'm certainly open to doing that. There's a couple of restrictions in that. I mean, first of all, Washington's already 8-2. The two Republican districts that we have are in Eastern Washington. I was getting a little feedback on the line. There we go. But the other thing is, I mean, I suppose you could redraw the districts. And I don't know for sure. I would like to see a demographer draw a map that makes it 9-1 or 10-0. I don't know if that's possible. I should explain why I support this, which I will in a moment. So you got the logistical problem. You would have to take the two Eastern Washington districts that are right now basically vertical next to each other and you'd have to turn them sideways and then send them over into Western Washington to pick up sufficient Democrats to get there. I don't know if that's possible or not. I'd like to see a map, first of all. Second of all, as some states are finding out, the state constitution governs a lot of these districts. And I don't know, I haven't looked to see what is in the Washington state constitution in terms of requirements. Some constitutions expressly forbid partisan gerrymandering. So we'd have to see if we were running afoul of the Washington state constitution, because the only way you can change the Washington state constitution is with the 2/3 vote in the state house and state senate, and then a majority vote of the people in Washington state. So all that would have to happen fairly quickly in order for this to come to pass. Lastly, we do our redistricting by a bipartisan commission. An initiative was passed to put that in place. So we'd have to change that. And we could change that. The state legislature absolutely could go in and vote and overturn the initiative and take back over control of the redistricting process. But those are all the impediments to it. Now, just to be clear, I don't support partisan gerrymandering. I think we'd be better off if every single state in the union was redistricted without any consideration of politics or incumbents. Iowa does that. They bring in demographers every 10 years. They just draw the maps based on what's fairest, most compact, and they don't even think about partisan stuff. But if the Republicans are going to, and they went into Texas in the middle of a 10-year cycle and redrew the districts to give them an advantage. They're now doing the same in Missouri. They're talking about doing the same in Indiana, North Carolina, Ohio, and Florida. I think we have to respond to that. And I certainly support what California is doing. So if it's possible, if it makes sense, if it's going to help in the larger fight, then yeah, I would absolutely be open to doing that.
Super. Thank you.
Thanks.
All right. Don't forget, during this call, you can press *6 on your telephone keypad and get signed up to receive the Congressman's very informative e-newsletter. And stay informed from the Congressman and his staff. They put out that e-newsletter frequently, so you can always have fresh information in your inbox. Again, press *6 to get subscribed. Next, we're heading out to Federal Way. We've got Megan on the line with us. Megan, welcome to the call. Go ahead with your question.
Yeah, I was just wondering, is there a way to rehire federal workers, within different states who have lost their jobs, to bolster needed services within states? I'm just kind of concerned about, election integrity, and also, a successful transition of power if there's a coup, which I suspect there might be. What are the plans with that, with elections?
Yeah, two things. Those are two separate questions. In terms of federal employees who have been laid off, there have been a number of efforts in the instances where those layoffs were illegal, and some of them are illegal and some of them aren't. Court cases have been brought. Some cases they were forced to rehire a lot of those federal employees. Others cases are pending. If they are out there, yes, they could absolutely be hired for state jobs. Now, states have to have the budget. They have to have the need. There's challenges there, but they absolutely could. Your second point is actually really important, and is something that I think we need to be concerned about. And job one in trying to stop it is to really make the case to the American people that this is a legitimate threat. I mean, too often people just sort of dismiss the notion that there could be, a coup, as you put it. But that's exactly what happened on January 6th. The presidential election in 2020 didn't come out the way Trump wanted and his MAGA supporters wanted. And so they looked for every possibility to block that election from being certified. And if they did it in 2020, why wouldn't they do it now when Trump is president and in control? And I will tell you, part of my concern with the use of the U.S. military for domestic law enforcement is that Trump is attempting to assert greater control over the U.S. military so that he could use it to enforce his will if he didn't like the outcome of an election. And I think you're absolutely right to be concerned about that. I mean, this certainly could happen in 2028, but it could also happen in 2026. Typically in House races, not sometimes in Senate races, you have at least a dozen races that are decided by less than a percentage point. And there's a fight as you're counting the ballots, as you're trying to. We Democrats lost a House race in Iowa in 2020 by 6 votes. If you have elections that are that close, I absolutely think where Republicans controlled the state, they will do what they can to block certification. There was an epic fight in North Carolina over a Supreme Court seat that the Democrat won. All the votes were counted. It was challenged. It was recounted. Final count, I forget by how much. It was like 100 votes or something, maybe a little less or a little more than that. The Republicans spent 6 months trying to block that election from being certified before ultimately it was. But yeah, I think we need to be worried about that. And I think we need to spread the word that this is a distinct risk and we need to honor the outcome of elections. Once the votes are counted, once the appeals are done, you're done. This person won, that person lost. Let's go forward. I do not trust the Trump administration to honor that. So we need to be legally ready and also making the argument publicly to people that they should stand up against those efforts.
Moving on to our next caller, we've got Kathy on SeaTac. Kathy, welcome to the call. You are live with Congressman Smith. Go ahead with your question.
Hello, Congressman Smith. I'm interested to know what coalitions you have built on the top 2 issues for you, and if there's anybody in your coalitions from across the aisle.
Let's see. That's a broad question, and I have more than 2 issues. I have a lot of issues around. Well, housing is a big thing, and one thing I did was got us greater access to federal property. There's a lot of property that Sound Transit bought up along the various lines where they wound up building, and even some where they thought they were going to build and didn't. That property sat unused for, in some cases, more than a decade because a federal law prevented it from being transferred to nonprofit housing agencies. So yeah, in that case, I was able to bring Republicans over. I got the change to that law attached to the National Defense Authorizing Act. And then I worked with Senator Pat Toomey. I had to give him something that he wanted about fentanyl, but it was something I supported anyway. And then got a whole bunch of Republicans and Democrats to approve that change in the law that supported housing. Also been able to drive out housing funds to help build that. So I'm building that coalition around that issue. The broader coalition I'm trying to build is around the issue that the first question raised about income inequality. And I am trying, we haven't had a ton of luck with Republicans because you heard in my answer, I support unions, I support government programs as part of it. But you have certainly heard an increase in rhetoric from Republicans that they are concerned about economic inequality, that they're concerned about the impact that's having on working people. So I've had a number of conversations to try to build support for doing something about that. In fact, you saw there was a brief moment when even Donald Trump suggested that he might be open to a wealth tax. Now he backed off of that in the blink of an eye. But those conversations are starting. And I talk about this with my Republican colleagues, but also people here locally. There are a number of, Republicans in my district that I have conversations with. The other coalition I'm trying to build is around a more sensible criminal justice system. I do think that mass incarceration was a problem, but I also think that the attacks, the defund the police, the abolish criminal justice system coalition was wrong. What we need greater alternatives to incarceration, but with transparency and accountability. So I met with the police chiefs from South King County 3 days ago, Kent, Federal Way, Renton, SeaTac, Tukwila, to say, how can we do that? How can we build, a coalition? So yeah, every issue I come up with, and it's not just 2, it's a dozen. I come up with, workforce development. How do we get more support for young people to get access to the job training they need to be employable? So I've worked with community and technical colleges. I've met in just the last week or 2 with Green River, Highline, and Renton. Also met with high schools, businesses, and unions to say, how can we all work together to make sure that these things are accessible? There's a program down in Tukwila called Anew, which trains people in basics of construction, and they also do commercial driver's license training. I got them the funds to set up that commercial driver's license training. I lobbied on behalf of the federal government to get them a grant that helped them set that up. So obviously a lot of other people had to be involved in getting that done. It wasn't just me, but I took the lead on it to help fund that. And now you can go get a commercial driver's license from this organization down in Tukwila. So sorry, I could literally talk for the next 3 hours plus about all the coalitions that I built to try to address these issues that are concerned to me. That is the way I think and the way I work. I am concerned that there are a lot of people now that think that the way to succeed politically and in terms of policy is to just decide what you want and then go yell at people that they ought to give it to you. I think it's better if you come up with ideas and then build the coalition and work with people to get the support you need to succeed. And I've been doing it on 100 different issues for a long time, and I'm good at it and dedicated to doing it.
Thank you.
It is great to see so many constituents have connected in to this live telephone town hall with Congressman Adam Smith. If you have a question you would like to ask live on the call, please press *3 on your telephone keypad. And don't forget, during this event, you can also get signed up to receive the Congressman's informative e-newsletter by pressing *6. Back to the phones we go. We've got Rumley out in Renton joining us now. Rumley, welcome to the call. What is on your mind? Hello, Rumley.
Hi, Congressman.
Welcome.
How you doing?
I'm well.
Okay, I got a question about what's going on in Israel right now with the genocide. Why are we still sending money to them or weapons to them? Are you in favor for that?
Actually, I put a statement out a week ago that we should restrict weapon sales to Israel until they implement a ceasefire and increase humanitarian assistance. Now, the reason for this up front was Israel historically is an ally and a partner and continues to be. And they were attacked, not just by Hamas, but by Hezbollah and Iran as well. So the notion that they had to defend against those attacks and protect themselves was something I supported. But we are past the point now that there is anything that militarily, as I said in my opening remarks, anything militarily that can be accomplished in Gaza. Yes, Hamas needs to be defeated, but the way to defeat them now is to support Palestinians who want an alternative to Hamas. To set that up, it's not going to be accomplished through further military action in Gaza. And there is a massive humanitarian crisis in Gaza right now that needs to be alleviated. So yes, I have said that I support restricting weapon sales to Israel to leverage them making those policy changes. I'm also concerned about the expansion of settlements and the violence that's occurring in the West Bank and have spoken out about that as well.
All right, our next caller, we've got Betty in Seattle joining us now. Betty, you are live with Congressman Smith. What's your question?
Hi, Congressman Smith. You're dealing with a lot at the national level. What could we as individuals do to help or to try to resist other than showing up to vote? There has to be more.
Yeah, look, I have a basic 4-step process. And on the one hand, it's not complicated. On the other hand, there's 1,000 different details below those 4 steps. I think we need to organize and develop a message. And there are 4 pieces to that. That's the 4 pieces I talk about. Number one, we got to keep building the case that Donald Trump is violating the Constitution. And we are witnessing a level of autocracy out of our president that we have not seen before. We need to fight back against that because it impacts all of us. And the basic impact on, American freedom, you're talking about people being picked up off the streets without due process. He's imposing tariffs, he's cutting off funding, all outside the bounds of the law. We ought to be concerned about that. Number 2, the policy implications. Okay, if you don't care about democracy, do you care about the economy? Do you care about, jobs? Do you care about inflation? The policies that are being put in place are harmful to our economic opportunity. He's doing nothing about inflation and nothing for the workers that he claimed he was going to support when he managed to win this last election. Number 3 is what I talked about a little bit earlier. we also need to present a reasonable alternative. A big part of the reason that Trump won is because people weren't happy with progressive democratic governance in the places where we were in charge. There wasn't enough efficiency and effectiveness. Crime, drugs, homelessness, lack of access to affordable housing. These were problems that we did not respond to in a sensible way. So I think we have to meet the voters at least halfway and say, disagree with your decision, but here's what we're going to do to address these issues. We did not do enough to secure the border. It became a major problem in a number of different places. So I think we have to be willing to say, here's what we're going to do and how we're going to change. The other piece of it is basic politics, and that is within the Democratic Party, which I'm not going to get into in great detail on an official call. But we need to run better candidates and run better campaigns and be willing to work hard. And I have considerable concerns about different aspects of that in terms of what individuals can do. There are a large number of organizations that are pushing on all manner of aspects of what I just laid out. Whether it's a policy issue, they're concerned about the cuts to Medicaid. There are organizations that are, organizing around opposing those cuts to Medicaid. Join those organizations, and then you can lobby. You lobby your individual member of Congress, but you can also become connected to people in other states and other districts who are lobbying members of Congress, where we need to grow our base of support. And that's the thing. I know, if you're in my district, this district's going to vote Democratic. Whether it's for me or somebody else, they're going to vote Democratic. They're going to vote against Trump. But what do we do to expand our support in districts that we don't now control, in states that we don't control? Work with organizations that are recruiting in those areas on the issue of Medicare, on the issue of food security, on the issue of immigration. Even parts of the country that are strongly in favor of greater border security are not in favor of having undocumented immigrants who are here working hard, raising families, paying taxes, being snatched out of their jobs, being snatched out of their schools, being snatched out of their communities, locked up and sent to Uganda or wherever. So grow those coalitions and participate with those organizations. And you can phone bank, you can send letters, you can send emails. If you have resources, you can pick the different organizations that you think are doing the most effective job on those issues and send them a small contribution. There is no shortage of groups and organizations that are trying to work towards the coalition to move our country in a different direction. Find them, support them, be active with them. And I know that's frustrating because the problem is significant and we want it solved immediately. I don't have a plan for solving it immediately. I have a plan for eventually successfully turning it back by building a strong enough coalition and a strong enough message to do that. And that's the approach I think we need to take.
Thank you.
All right, staying on the phones here, we've got Heidi joining us from Seattle. Heidi, you are live with Congressman Smith. Go ahead with your question.
Oh, hi. Thank you for taking my call. I have a question. My husband and I are both independent businesses, and I actually have a business in the healthcare industry.
Okay.
And we have been fortunate enough through the Washington Health Plan Finder to get health insurance. But moving forward with these cuts, we will not be able to afford health insurance. And just also as a side note, I've been in the health industry for 21 years, and I have stopped taking health insurance payments from my clients because they don't pay, and there's no recourse for them to pay. So I feel like our system is so broken that I want to go live in another country because I can't imagine what I'm going to do without access to health care. So I heard you talking about coalitions with the last caller, and I if there's a coalition that will do something, great. But in the meantime, what can we do as individuals to secure our health care? Like my husband has heart disease, so he will need to get health care. And when he had his heart attack, it was $45,000. That's unimaginable to pay without health insurance. So what solutions do you have for your constituents who will be losing their ability to have affordable health care?
Yeah, we've got a broken system that has to be fixed. Now, as long as the Trump administration is able to put in place its Medicaid cuts, cut the Affordable Care Act, I'm not going to lie to you, I don't have a solution for that. All right. I mean, we can help in the sense that there are various different agencies out there that do provide insurance in different ways. And you can do sort of a piecemeal casework. Okay, here's your problem. I can connect you with that person. But that's just triage. I mean, that's just trying to mitigate the damages. We need to fundamentally change our healthcare system. So there's two steps to it. One, the damage that is being done by the cuts to Medicaid, as I said, we went from 12% to 4% uninsured. We go right back to 12% after these cuts. So we could stop that, and we could at least protect 8% of the people in Washington State and probably nationwide, and preserve their health care. But even beyond that, that's not enough. We need a universal access to healthcare system. A system that has everybody having insurance. Now, the only way we get to that is we also have to regulate how we spend money, because the thing about our healthcare system that's truly tragic is we spend more money on healthcare than any other country in the world. It's not even close. We're almost twice as much as the next country on a per capita basis. But we don't get the result. Sure.
Okay, so because I've been taking health insurance for 21 years, or actively for part of that, when they brought in the system, we are, as a healthcare provider, I have to go through 2 or 3 other companies to get approval to get payment, and all those people are taking a cut of whatever payment. My hourly wage 21 years ago would have been $110 through insurance. Now it's $55, and that's not livable for what I do. I'm a massage therapist, so I can't massage 40 hours a week. So it doesn't work. So I think there's so much broken that like there's been changes made, but I am. Oh, go ahead.
I agree with you. I'm not disagreeing with you at all. The fundamental structure of the way the healthcare system is set up, we're spending all this money and we're not getting the results. But a lot of it also, we got to look at where we're spending that money. Well, where is the money going? And it's going in many instances to places where we don't emphasize primary care. So we screw up diagnosis and we screw up treatment, and we wind up spending a ton of money that doesn't help anybody. We spend money on areas where people have figured out how to force the insurance companies to pay, as opposed to areas that actually are going to improve health. We approve cancer drugs that will extend life on average by a month and a half and cost $10,000 a month. All right. We have to start making choices about where we spend the money so that we can better afford the basic care that people need. And that takes big, huge fundamental changes. Now, what we did do is we expanded access to health insurance through the Affordable Care Act and through expanded Medicaid. And that made a huge difference for people. And taking that away is going to drive us backwards. But even if we didn't do that, we have to do more to change our healthcare system. We have to get everybody covered. And there's a whole bunch of different ways to do that. I'm a co-sponsor of Medicare for All. There are also a variety of different universal access programs that are not single payer. Europe, France, Germany, Switzerland, these countries have great healthcare systems that are not single payer and cover everybody. That's the direction I think we need to go in.
I encourage everyone to take a moment right now and press *6 on your telephone keypad to get signed up to receive the Congressman's very informative e-newsletter. Again, during this event, you can press *6 and get signed up to receive the Congressman's e-newsletter. Next question, Congressman. This one comes from Jillian on Facebook, who's asking, what can be done to support parents of young children? Child care is so expensive.
Yeah, no, I think that is the major challenge. And that was one of the best aspects of the Build Back Better plan. That was, for the uninitiated, that was a major plan that Democrats were trying to pass when President Biden was in office, and we controlled the House and the Senate. Passed the House, failed in the Senate by a vote or two, so we didn't get there. But greater support for childcare. The other key part of childcare is we need to train and get in place more childcare workers. But I think it is something that we should spend money on. And, I saw a stat during the debate over Build Back Better that in Europe, the average, the the societies in Europe, the governments spend on average $14,000 per year per child. The comparable figure in the United States of America is $600. We have not prioritized support for that. I think another thing, universal pre-K. We do have programs in certain school districts where you can have pre-K education for 3 and 4-year-olds. I was living in Northeast Tacoma when my children were 3 and 4. We had to pay for it, but you could pay and get access to pre-K at the age of 3 and 4. So yeah, the programs are there. They need to be better funded and better supported because the pressure on parents and the cost of childcare is astronomical.
Our next caller is Ina. Ina's got affordable housing on her mind. Ina, welcome to the call. Go ahead with your question, please.
Hi. You recently said you would support legislation to restrict the sale of some offensive weapons to Israel as leverage to stop the war in Gaza, but you reject the Block the Bombs Act that would immediately stop sales or gifts to Israel of MK-80 and BLU-109 bombs, both made by your campaign donor General Dynamics. Why would you not immediately sign on to this and call for an end to U.S. support for the genocide being committed in Gaza? We need an immediate arms embargo.
Yeah. Well, none of this stuff is going to be immediate because Congress or the president is going to have to do it. The Block the Bombs Act isn't going to pass any more than the restrictions on weapon sales that I've advocated for is going to pass, first of all. Second of all, that particular weapon system that you mentioned, I'm happy to block sales of that. I don't have any problem whatsoever. The Block the Bombs Act requires congressional approval for any weapon sales to Israel. That I don't support doing. I don't support basically requiring Congress to pass that for one particular country. I do support restricting those weapon sales. The fastest and quickest way to do that, the executive branch has it within their power to do that. The Block the Bombs Act has to pass the House and pass the Senate before that can happen. So I think the quickest, most effective way to do this is to advocate for the president to restrict those weapon sales. And, unless Israel does the stuff that we talked about, rushing humanitarian aid, stopping the war. So that's why I don't support the Block the Bombs Act.
All right, going to an online question now. We've got one from Stephen who's asking, do you have any thoughts about the possibility of Trump ordering the National Guard to occupy greater Seattle streets?
Yeah, no, I think it's a distinct risk. He is expanding that. Obviously, it started in Los Angeles. It's spread to Washington, D.C. Rumors are in the next day or two it's going to happen in Chicago. So yes, no, I mean, Trump is using this as a political tool and specifically targeting areas that are run by Democrats, again, to advance his partisan argument. It is worth noting that crime is pretty bad in Oklahoma City. In fact, violent crime is higher in Oklahoma City than it is in Washington, D.C. It's higher in Shreveport, Louisiana than it is in Washington, D.C. And I imagine if I did research, I could come up with another dozen or 24 cities in red states, Republican areas, that are every little bit as bad. And yet Trump is focusing his attention on democratically run cities. And that's for partisan political reasons. I think we need to speak out against it, as I've done several times during the course of this call. And yeah, I think Seattle, fits that bill. Now, I will say, and I've said this a number of times, I think crime is a problem. But I don't think necessarily we've responded to it as well as we should have, in addition to the concerns about, what I mentioned earlier, King County and the way they funded some of their grant programs without any accountability or transparency. Many of those programs are alternative to incarceration programs where there has been no accountability. Instead of sending offenders to the criminal justice system, they've been sent to nonprofits. But the way they've granted those contracts, we don't know what those nonprofits do. And there was one audit that showed that over half of the offenders who were sent there either didn't show up or didn't complete the program, and there was no consequences for that. So yeah, we can do better on crime. The pithy line that I've come up with is crime is a problem, fascism isn't the answer. And President Trump is trying to impose that mostly on Democratic cities for partisan political reasons. And I think we should absolutely be worried about that coming to Seattle.
All right, our next caller is Remy from Kent. Remy, you are live with Congressman Smith. What's your question?
Yeah, good afternoon, Congressman. So my question is about the immigration. So I would like to know where you stand on the TPS program and the humanitarian parole that was revoked by the President Trump.
Yeah, no, I support the temporary protective status and humanitarian parole. These are programs that were put in place for people in areas of massive civil strife and disruption. Afghanistan, Haiti, a couple others. They've been given TPS status, Venezuela in some cases. And President Trump has unilaterally revoked that status, which has basically taken hundreds of thousands of people, or I think it's probably that many, in the U.S. who are here in cases like Afghanistan, fleeing Afghanistan, and then they got nowhere to go back to, and now they have no status in the U.S. Those programs were put in place to help people who are very clearly fleeing life-threatening situations, and I do not support, President Trump revoking that status and essentially, creating massive amounts of people who have nowhere to go. And that's the thing to understand. When Trump talks about border security, it's really much more comprehensive than that. It is an anti-immigrant, policy that is blocking immigrants and blocking refugees and asylum seekers across the board in a way that I think is the wrong policy for our country.
All right, let's go ahead and get one more call in with available time. Maxine in Federal Way, you are live with the Congressman. Go ahead now.
Hi, Congressman. Thank you for accepting my call. My biggest concern, there's so much to be concerned about in our country right now, but my biggest concern for my children and grandchildren is the breakdown of democracy. What can we do as citizens to get our democracy back on track?
Yeah, no, I mean, I would say that, and I mentioned earlier that the very first question was about economic inequality. The two biggest concerns for me are that and what you just raised. I mean, the basic principles of how representative democracy is supposed to work are breaking down. And I think a huge part of the problem is we have become a more and more self-centered society. We don't know how to work with people that we disagree with. Or, and that's part of it. In a representative democracy, you can't just be concerned about what you want. You have to be concerned about what your neighbors want, what the people in the community want, what's good for society as a whole. And then you have to try and balance those. We've moved away from that. I mean, when I was growing up, we talked a lot about those issues, representative democracy, how you work and cooperate and build coalitions and all of that. Now, my experience is they basically teach you how to be an advocate. And that's part of it. It's really important. You figure out what's important to you, and then you go advocate for it within the system. But if that's all you're doing is advocating for what you and the groups you belong to want, then civil society is not long going to survive in that situation. We've lost track of the notion of how do we work together to move forward. And certainly, we've seen it on the right on January 6th. I mean, that was it. Those people showed up and said, we don't like the result. We're not accepting it. Part of representative democracy is sometimes you lose and you have to be okay with that. But even here locally, part of the reason I'm doing so many teletown halls is I try to do public town halls and people show up and they won't stop screaming. They won't let anybody else speak because apparently their opinions are the only ones that matter. And it's like, I know what you're saying is important. It's probably important. It's important to you. Certainly it's probably important to other people. But there are other important issues as well. If you're going to live in a society, you have to learn how to work together and not so quickly just dismiss everybody who disagree with you and simply focus on your own issues. So I think we need to reestablish the idea of what representative democracy is. And I think, my opinion, President Trump's taken advantage of that. He doesn't care about representative democracy. He cares about his own personal power. And he's taken advantage of the discord and the lack of function in terms of how we are conducting ourselves in civil society, to push forward an agenda that I think fundamentally challenges our Constitution. So I am 100% with you, and I try. I meet with people, it doesn't matter, across the board, one group or the other group. And then, whenever I do that, by the way, the groups that disagree with that group will literally attack. Why did you meet with those people? Why were you talking to them? It's my job,
Yes,
so,
I agree.
I'm not saying I agree with people just because I sit down with them. I'm saying that I'm here to represent them. So that's what I'm trying to do. I'm doing my job in that way. So that's what I think is important and how we should approach it.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, Congressman, looking up at the clock, we need to begin to wrap up this event. I want to make sure that we give you some time, though, for some closing thoughts, please.
Yeah, I think the questions were really good. They touched upon a lot of important issues. I want to keep doing this. I normally say this at the beginning. I didn't this time, but I'll say it at the end. Please stay in touch with me. Contact me. Contact me, whether it's email, fax, text. I meant phone call. Dated myself there for just a moment. Let's have an open dialogue about it. I'm not, I every day find things that I hadn't thought of and things that I'm wrong about. That's why I want to have this discussion and conversation. I still believe in representative democracy, that the more opinions you bring in, the more likely you are to ultimately get to the right answer. So I want to continue that dialogue, that conversation, and try to work on the very, very real problems that we face as a country and in our community. But thank you for spending a little bit of time on holiday weekend with me. We'll do this again soon. Thanks.
And echoing those words of thanks to everybody for taking the time to participate in today's telephone town hall with Congressman Adam Smith. If you would like to stay up to date on the Congressman's work, please follow him on Facebook, X, Instagram, and YouTube with the handle @RepAdamSmith, as well as on Blue Sky, the handle @AdamSmith.house.gov. If you'd like to subscribe to his e-newsletter at this point in the call, please just stay on the line and leave us your name and email address after the tone. Thanks again for your time today. We hope you stay healthy and safe and have a great evening. This concludes our call. Goodbye.